All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here with our 2024 college football playoff predictions. Obviously, we're going to start with our conference title winners, look at some award winners as well, and then to our final playoff brackets. Timestamps below if you'd like to skip around. A lot of research this season, Nick, has accumulated into these awards, and we're very confident in what we have selected. A lot of excitement is in store this college football season, though. And starting with the group of five, obviously one of these teams here is likely to get the nomination for the college football playoff as a 12 seed. Certainly love that, they're going to get an automatic qualifier. They have a chance to compete in the CFB with these lower strength of schedules. You're looking at the AAC, you got Memphis as the favorite. We went with Tulane and UTSA. I really think Tulane's a sleeper team this year despite losing their head coach, Willie Fritz. I think John Summerall is going to step in and do a pretty good job with this team. Still returned plenty of good guys on defense. Jesus Machado, Tyler Grubbs, Patrick Jenkins, for example. I think the secondary will play well. More importantly for Tulane, though, this offense I think is significantly underrated. They add Ty Thompson, a guy who's at Oregon for a couple of years, with a great group of weapons. Mario Williams, Gilkeith Brown, Shaz Preston, to name a few. Alex Bauman at tight end's very good. And they have a great runner in Mekhi Hughes coming back. So I think Tulane is an incredibly underrated team. And then UTSA, of course, Nick, a bit of an underdog pick from you. Owen McGowan, certainly you're expecting growth from him this season. Kavorian Barnes is a really good running back for them. The right receiver position isn't as stout as it was, the last year or two. Decorian Clark is still one of the nation's best in that regard. They certainly have a veteran defense as well, led by guys like Jamal Ligon and Joe Evans up front. And then a secondary as well that has some nice playmakers, including the addition of Denver Harris. What do you make of the AAC, Nick? And obviously these teams will be fighting for the presumable nomination, as there's usually a lot of great ranked teams in this conference, so I'd expect them to be, the favorite for the CFP.
While the American has gotten weaker thanks to conference realignment, there are still some very strong teams in this conference. Memphis is a very strong team. Tulane's a team you're very high on this year with their new head coach plug in. I like UTSA to win this conference. I think Owen McGowan is a really solid quarterback they're going to plug in and play. He's not Frank Harris, nothing like Frank Harris, who was solid for them last year. But McGowan, I think, is a really steady arm, good completion percentage, and limited appearances, and showed me that he had some skills to work with. Kavorian Barnes is a really fast, solid runner. He was really solid last year, 715 yards on the ground and 6 scores. I like to see him take an increased role and be involved. Yes, the wide receiver room is a little weak, but I think Willie McCoy is in line for a pretty solid year after having 2 touchdown catches last year. I like what they have on defense. I think Jamal Ligon is a really strong physical player. Kent Robinson is a fantastic player in the secondary they return, who was the team's top returning tackler and top tackler last year. I think he's a really solid coverage asset who had 4 pass breakups as well. They bring back some other different pieces in the secondary, a pretty strong defense that added Denver Harris, who I think was a really underrated add of the portal. I like what UTSA can do this year, and third favorites to win the conference. Not bad odds either. I do like what this Roadrunners team can do.
Now you look at pretty much a lock for the CUSA in the Liberty Flames. They get a couple of guys back in their front seven, CJ Bazile, TJ Bush. Some really good players there on defense, but this is going to be the Quentin Cooley and Caden Salter show. These guys put up phenomenal production last year, and JB Chadwell's run-heavy offense. They combined for over 2,400 yards and 28 rushing touchdowns, and the backup Billy Lucas also had 600 yards. So this is a Liberty team. They put up a lot of production, a lot of offense coming your way. They were able to do this last year, that being a team that punched their ticket to the Fiesta Bowl, looked good on one drive, and they had nothing for the Ducks the rest of the game. A team that's a legit CFB contender, though, in Oregon. So no real shame there, but it certainly wasn't a great look. This is a team that wasn't ranked for most of the season last fall because of the strength of schedule. It's not any better this year, Nick. They play at App State, at Middle Tennessee. I think those are 2 games you can circle for potential losses. Maybe at New Mexico State, even though it's a completely different team that they saw last year. Not a beautiful schedule at all. I think at home versus Western Kentucky can cause them problems as well. Maybe Jacksonville State. So there'll be some intrigue throughout the year with this team. Strength of schedule is incredibly low, Nick, and if they have even one slip up, they are knocked out of playoff contention. What is your thoughts?
Liberty's going to have to run the table if they want to get to the playoff. I think the situation's pretty clear for this team. They got to go absolutely win out. They got to run the table. I think Jamie Caldwell's bunch can do that. I like him a lot as a coach, former Coastal Carolina head coach, who's taken over this Liberty team that's been really consistent during their time in the FBS with Hugh Freeze as their head coach, and then Caldwell, who took them over. Took them 13-1 last year. I like what they have on offense. Cooley and Slater, obviously, must-watch TV. These two, they're incredible. You and I, sat down and watched the conference title game last year together. We We were at the Pac-12 title game. We watched it in the booth of the CUSA conference game. We were impressed with how this team looked. They're phenomenal. They play really fast. They're very entertaining, a very fun team to watch. And I think with their turn on offense, they can continue to be that way. Slater is a phenomenal quarterback who can really be strong in the pocket, as well as his ability to run 32 passing touchdowns to 6 picks last year, 2,800 yards passing. Sure, the schedule is weak, right? The schedule is extremely weak, and they're going to run the score up against some of these bad teams. And I certainly do agree with that. They have a terrible strength of schedule. But if they win out, I don't see any reason why they should be left out of the playoff. This is why we expanded to get teams in that deserve. If you go undefeated and win your conference, I think you deserve to be in even at the group of 5 level. And obviously that's something we're going to have to see how it shakes out. But I think this team has all the pieces to absolutely go run the table and get in the playoff.
Yeah, they ended the last 2 weeks of the season, 390 plus rushing and 5 touchdowns in both of those games. They put up 300 plus frequently on the ground. This is just a fun team to watch overall. So I think Liberty certainly is going to have plenty of intrigue this season. You look at the MAC, Miami of Ohio and Toledo being the options for us. Brett Gabbert coming back for the Red Hawks. The run game was pretty sound last year. Wonder what they're going to do without Rashad Amos, though. They returned some vets on their O-line. The defense was incredibly stout last year, and they get guys back like Matt Salopek, Ty Wise. So this is a very good Miami of Ohio football team overall that I know a lot of people will be interestingly watching. And then you skip to the Mountain West. This isn't that competitive of a conference on paper right now. Boise State, they're, a minus 110 to win the conference. They pick up Malachi Nelson from USC to pair up with Ashton Gianti, who they're lucky to have, stayed. This is one of the top running backs in the country. He would have went anywhere in FBS if he wanted to. Big time return there. They obviously won this conference last year. Some of the guys that get back on defense, Amarian McCoy, Andrew Simpson, Herbert Gums up front. So this is a veteran team. And, of course, they have Markel Reed in the secondary, I think is phenomenal. And then you're looking at the Sun Belt. App State, a very good team, Nick. It's a good selection there. This is a team that got his back like Joey Aguilar at quarterback, Christian Horn, Caden Robinson, Kane Roberts at running back. This is an offense that gets a lot of guys back. This isn't your old school App State offense. They love to air it out. Sean Clark has a good thing going here. Santana Hopper, Nate Johnson on defense. They have some really good players, and they also picked up the addition of Miles Farmer via the transfer portal. But I went with Texas State. I think that, G.J. Kinney's got something cooking there. I just think this offense is incredibly fun to watch. They beat Baylor last year, which ended up being a pretty disappointing football team. But they walked into Waco, and they had no issues with this football team. Jordan McLeod coming over. I think he had a great season for JMU. They're obviously going to get back guys like Joey Hobart, Cole Wilson at wide receiver. I think this offense's capabilities, they can probably score 40 a game. They'll have to have these veterans step up on defense to fully complete that transition to a winning team in conference. But I'm going to take the underdog pick here in the Sun Belt, Nick, in Texas State. You're going to stick with the favorite in Appalachian State. I don't think you go wrong with either of those picks.
I like App State. I think this is a team that has high, potential. They do play that Liberty team like we were talking about earlier, so that's something you want to keep an eye on for that matchup. That's a very interesting matchup. App State's been a very consistent program since they joined the FBS level. They were very dominant at the FCS level as well. And this is a team that's been consistent in the Sun Belt. They were not a bad team last year. They return enough talent, in my opinion. I think the offense is solid to get the job done. Joey Aguilar, I think, is a solid quarterback who can lead this team through further heights. I do like what this team has. They're not a bad roster at all. They play, a schedule that's not incredibly difficult. I think the conference is, there is opportunity for teams in the Sun Belt this year. If you want to look at a conference, it seems like it's a bit more wide open. Texas State certainly is a team that can be involved in it. I think Aguilar is a fantastic quarterback who will read the way. I think Kanye Roberts is a decent running back who's going to step up and replace Nate Noel, who's gone. I think Roberts can take that full load and be solid on offense. I like what the defense has as well. I think Toledo, a bit of a gamble going with Toledo out of the MAC. They lose a lot of their roster, but I do think they return some talented pieces that could really help in that conference. I think the running back room has enough depth to get the job done right now. I think Jacquez Stewart is a really solid back that's taking over. Tucker Gleason looked good in relief last year for their quarterback, DeQuan Finn, who moved on to bigger and brighter things. Although if you do want a bit of a long shot, Western Michigan, I think is not a bad pick in the MAC either. I think Western Michigan has a lot of positive things going for them in Kalamazoo. While Boise State should clean up the Mountain West, I think the Boise State roster is very strong. I like what the coaching is doing up there. I think Boise State's in a good position to dominate that conference, considering it's a bit weaker. The lower end of that conference is weak compared to some of these other conferences. I think Boise State should have no problem winning the Mountain West.
Now looking at our Power 4 conference championship predictions, we'll just lightly touch on these because we're about to talk about all these teams in our playoff bracket anyways. I think obviously the Big 12 is incredibly wide open. The SEC with Alabama, losing Nick Saban, they're kind of being overlooked, it seems. And then the ACC, nobody's picking Clemson, Nick. No one's giving them a shot in hell, but I think this is an incredibly underrated team where the offense is probably going to click a lot more than people anticipate this year. They got a nice right tackle in Blake Miller. Cade Klubnik, a former five-star, is going to play more to his potential this year. I think Phil Maffa's a good runner. And then they have a nice receiving core led by Tyler Brown and Antonio Williams, who will be healthy this season. Jake Bringstool as well. And the defense is still phenomenal. There was a lot of young guys last year to get on the field, and that's great news for Clemson. Guys like Peter Woods, TJ Parker, Khalil Barnes. I mean, you name them, Nick. This is a team that's got a lot of youth. I think Clemson being significantly overlooked, not on our podcast.
Certainly not. I think Clemson's a phenomenal team that has incredible depth at defense that's so young, and offense I think finally will click. I think this is the year Cade Klubnik puts it together. I think he's going to finally figure it out. The wide receiving room's gotten a little bit better. They finally started recruiting the offensive side of the ball. I think the running back room has enough talent to get the job done. The offensive line is a bit weak, but I do think it's a unit that's not too bad. The defense, I love the defense across the board. I think all three parts of the defense are phenomenal this year for Clemson. They've really done a good job building up the trenches on the defensive side of the ball with some really young guys, like you alluded to, Peter Woods, an incredibly young player who still has a lot to give, some other strong pieces on the defensive line. I like what Clemson can do. I think they're getting slept on across the nation in the media. I really can't understand why, because pound for pound, I think this roster is the best one in the conference. I think they have a really decent schedule. Yes, they got to play Georgia week 1, but I think they'll contend with Georgia week 1 in that opening season matchup. I like what Clemson can do. I think they're going to win the ACC this year and find their way in the playoff.
Now moving to our FBS National Awards, starting with the Heisman Trophy. 2 SEC quarterbacks for us, and this is obviously an award. It's probably going to be a big toss-up this year. Dylan Gabriel and Will Howard, 2 guys you could certainly give looks to in the Big 12. I'm going to stick with Jalen Milroe. I think him and Kalen DeBoer are just going to be an ultimate duo, that is. I think he's going to put up some great production. Ollie Gordon for both of us as the Doak Walker. Kind of a cheap shot pick, and obviously he's not going to have the same season he had last season, but I certainly think he's going to run the ball to the tune of plenty of production behind an offensive line that has an ungodly amount of experience. Luther Burton, pretty easy pick for the Blitnikoff. We hate to copy each other, Nick, but we did it last year, Marvin Harrison, and that worked out splendid. Colston Loveland at tight end for me. I think Michigan, they're going to have to get him heavily involved. Certainly worry about who else will command targets for the Wolverines. I know Loveland's in for a good deal per week. Deion Walker, absolutely love this guy. I have him taking home 2 pieces of hardware for Kentucky. I think he's just an athletic freak of nature for the Wildcats. Jonah Monheim. Moving the center for USC, likely going to be in for a massive season. Jay Higgins was overlooked last year. He didn't win this award despite having unreal production, 170-plus tackles. But this season, I think he'll continue to impress in terms of production in Iowa. They're going to win some more games than people expect. So I think Higgins will be in line for that award. And I think someone from Ohio State secondary is a lock to win the Jim Thorpe Award. This is, a piece of trophy, Nick, that always seems to be won by the person you don't expect. So I'm going to take Davison Igbeson. I think he's a good run defender. I thought he played very well in coverage last year. I think he's going to step up his game immensely. I think he's going to go ahead and win that award, taking a bit of an underdog. Then John Summerall for Tulane, a bit of a spoiler there for who my Group of 5 selection is. For the CFP, Nick, go ahead and list off your awards and which ones you feel most confident in.
Yeah, so for the Heisman, I'll go with Quinn Ewers. I think Ewers is going to be really solid in that Texas system again this year. Another year of experience for him. We saw him last year really flourish in that offense. I think heading to a new conference, getting tougher competition. I think the wide receiver room at Texas is really strong. I think the offensive line is going to hold up really well. I think he'll be a really solid quarterback this year. He's trying to raise his draft stock as well. What's a better way to raise a draft stock than go out and win the Heisman? I think Ewers can certainly go do that this year. Like you said, you and I agree with Gordon and Burton for those 2 awards for the Walker and Blitnikoff. But I think those 2 just make so much sense when you look at it, especially Luther Burton. I think he's going to have an absolute dominant season. For my John Mackey, I went Jake Bringingstool. I think Clemson, like I said, I think Klubnik and Clemson are going to really be clicking this year. I like the wide receiver room, but when you have a really strong physical tight end, a prototypical tight end like Bringingstool, I think that's a really solid target to have in your back pocket. I like that a lot. For my Outland Trophy, I went Josh Farmer from FSU. I think he's going to have a really strong season at defensive tackle. He can be in the backfield. They got to find sacks and tackles for loss somewhere. I think Farmer's going to be the guy to get that numbers for Florida State if this team is going to go on and compete in the conference like people think they're going to. Zeke Corral is my Remington Trophy winner at center. I think he's going to be really strong at NC State. Graduate senior, has great experience in college football. I think you're going to plug him into an offensive line that's been pretty solid the past couple of years. I think he'll be really strong at center. I think he can do a whole lot. I do have Deion Walker also winning the same award as you do. I think he's a really strong player out of Kentucky, a very physical, nice, player that's just going to eat up quarterbacks all year long. I have another Wildcat for my Butkus Award with Jamon Dumas Johnson, who's transferring over from Georgia. I think he's going to click immediately in this Kentucky defense. I think you plug him in, he's going to quarterback this defense and be a great leader. We saw the natural talent with him. Injuries and some other off-the-field stuff has made things a little more difficult for him, but now at Kentucky, I think with spotlight's a little bit less on him, he's going to have a room to grow. I think he's a key to success for the Wildcats defense this year. For my Jim Thorpe, I went Jabbar Muhammad, who's transferring over to Oregon. I thought about Caleb Downs. Certainly, I think an Ohio State person is a really solid pick in the secondary, but I think Muhammad, we saw him in flashes last year be potentially the best defensive back in the nation while he was at Washington. Had a really dominant season, especially in the back half of that season. He's going to plug into Oregon, hoping to keep up that same sort of high level of play. I think he can certainly do that this year. And then sticking with the Oregon theme, I'm going with Dan Lanning as my coach of the year. I think Lanning will get the Ducks, pretty deep in the college football playoff after missing out last year and disappointing in some regards by losing the Pac-12 title game. I think Lanning has a nice schedule in front of him. He knows what he wants to do. He was obviously a highly sought-after coach with Alabama circling around him during their coaching search. Lanning has a lot of product to work with up there in Oregon. I think he's going to get the job done and be a phenomenal coach this year, leading his team very far.
Now moving forward to our college football playoff predictions, we'll go ahead and start with my playoff bracket. 4 teams, 8 teams, 12 teams. Doesn't matter, Nick. I still have the same lame Final Four. I just think that's how it's going to align, at least for 2024. We'll start with Alabama, a team I have beating Georgia in the regular season, being delegated to the 5 following the conference title loss in Atlanta, though, in the rematch. I think they're going to run the table, though, all the way to the Final Four. I think Alabama, Jalen Milroe, Kalen DeBoer, this is going to be an underrated offense, phenomenal offensive line, at least in terms of upside and talent. I think the defense is still incredibly deep, and a lot of people aren't recognizing that their roster still has a lot of 5 stars, including the edge rushing department. It has 4 of them alone who didn't even see the field last year. So this is a team in Alabama I think certainly still very impressive. And really focusing on these first-round matchups, though, Ole Miss, I think this is a team that's going to win 10 games, get into the CFP, play Texas, who has a lot of revampment on offense. C.J. Baxter just went down with an injury. 3 new top pass catchers led by Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond. In Seattle Bolden as well. I think Texas, their defense, though, they still have a lot of size in the trenches on both sides of the ball, really. I think their secondary is still something you got to worry about with them. Looking on the other side of the bracket, Oregon and Notre Dame, the Irish, certainly don't have the toughest of schedules. They play only 3 road games. Oregon, like you alluded to, and Dan Lanning, I think their offense is incredible. Dylan Gabriel, Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson. I think Jordan James is going to be in contention for the Doak Walker. I think Oregon's going to be a phenomenal team this year. Well, Notre Dame, they're incredibly stout on the defensive side of the ball. I think Riley Leonard, he's going to do good things this year with Mike Denbrock as the OC. And, of course, up top, in the top right, Penn State and Missouri. Great defense from Penn State. Will Drew Aller in the passing attack provide enough this season? Likely so, but I don't think it's going to be anything that can run them deep into the playoffs. While Missouri, on the other hand, has Brady Cook, Luther Burden, just a 4 of weapons there. Ohio State is my national champion, Nick, over Georgia. Well, I know, real shocking, right? But I think that's what it's aligning for this year. Again, regardless of how deep this playoff is, the best teams are still going to be representing the national title game in Atlanta on January 20th, and those are the best 2.
I think this is a very fair bracket when you look at it. I think Ohio State and Georgia, 2 very strong teams. I think, Tulane getting in there is very interesting at your 12 pick, certainly, and then Utah winning the Big 12 before running into Alabama. Certainly a tough draw for them.
Yeah, Utah, the Big 12 champion for me. And a conference is kind of a toss-up. I know we struggled to make predictions for our Big 12. You went ahead and went with Kansas State, though, Nick, as we forward to your bracket. They're going to be the 4 seed. They'll have a tough draw of their own in Georgia. Seems like whoever that 4 seed is going to have an SEC team is likely the consensus here. So Georgia, obviously, they're going to make a deep wave for you. Penn State also making the bracket as one of the lower seeds, but a team that just we don't think can probably make a run in the playoffs due to the limitations on offense, especially against the nasty Notre Dame secondary, that is, if they do end up playing the Irish. I think Notre Dame can certainly contest with Ohio State there, Nick, that quarterfinal rematch. Obviously, these are all hypotheticals, of course, but I think there's certainly plenty of intrigue on that side. Oregon and Clemson will be a great matchup. As much as I do like my bracket, I think yours has a little bit more substance in terms of excitement, because I think Oregon and Missouri would also be a very exciting matchup. What do you think of your first-round contests? And obviously, who do you think can make the deepest run out of the first round? There's Georgia and Oregon, who you have facing off in the national championship game, so I guess that would kind of explain it. But those are going to be 2 hard runs for them both to make at the same time.
Yeah, so I went a little bit different here in this first, era of this new playoff, first year of this new playoff era. I decided to go 2 teams running the gauntlet and going through all the way from the first round, with Georgia and Oregon making it to the title game before Georgia ultimately wins the national championship. I think that Georgia will beat Alabama in the regular season, and then Alabama will knock them off in the conference title game before Georgia ultimately gets the last laugh as they win a national championship, but Alabama's in the hunt in the semifinal as well, ultimately falling to a really good Oregon team, and Alabama just kind of running out of gas after having to play a tough Texas team as well. I do have Florida State making the playoff. I think they're going to sneak in barely at the 10 seed, but I think they'll get absolutely washed by Texas. I think Texas will really win in that tight matchup. That 8-9 Notre Dame Penn State game I think is extremely interesting to look at, certainly in South Bend. That's a matchup that's going to be really fun. Two teams that don't really normally compete in the playoff getting a chance. Penn State had never made the playoff. Notre Dame only made it a few times and got blown out in those games. Setting up a Notre Dame-Ohio State 1-8 matchup that I think could be an extremely strong matchup, a matchup that we saw last year that came down to the wire with Ohio State walking it off at the buzzer in South Bend. I think that's a matchup that could go punch for punch the entire game. I really do like what Notre Dame has this year. That could be a really crazy high-scoring affair. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Oregon, Missouri, another high-scoring potential affair. I think Missouri is going to be a lot of fun to watch this year. I think they have a lot of energy, and I almost picked them to beat Oregon and then completely shake up my bracket, but I ended up going with the Ducks, who I think will knock off Clemson once they get to the quarterfinal round before Oregon goes on and runs their way to a national title, falling just runner-up to Georgia, who looked to get another national title after falling short of 3 in a row last year. They look to become a team that can win 3 in 4 years, which is something that is still very hard to do. Nick Saban did that in Alabama, but not a lot of programs have done that outside of that. I do think Georgia has a very strong roster top to bottom. I think they're a very dominant team that's going to go through some ups and downs in the regular season, but I think they're going to sort it out. I think Kirby knows how to coach his guys to get them over the finish line in the end, and they're going to win the national title of the game for me this year. But I do think the 4 teams that I have, all 4 of them could beat each other on any given day and win the national title. I think those are 4 very strong teams, and I also think Clemson's right in that kind of mix as that 5 team, considering you and I had 3 of the same teams in our final 4. We had just one swapping between Oregon and Clemson, but those 2 teams play each other in both our brackets. So you can really see that it looks like there's 5 teams this year that really have the best shot at going for a national title. It's going to be just which one of those 5 can survive the gauntlet and get the job done.
Georgia for you as the national champions, Ohio State for me. Both teams, though, making it to the CFB final, that is. I think this is going to be great for college football. Nick, certainly want to get your opinion on a 12-team playoff. At first, I was kind of like, it's a little ridiculous because, every year we have teams who don't deserve to make it, and now you're going to be looking at potential 4-loss teams in the playoffs. And whatever concessions we may have, they might be acceptable, but at the same time, I think this is going to provide more meaningful games later on into the year. You really can't complain too much with it. I think with all the bowl opt-outs, a lot of these games have lost their luster. You have people opting out of the Rose Bowl, for Christ's sake, Nick. So there's certainly a lot of things that I think this is certainly going to help with. Overall, I think it's a W for college football. People will say more blowouts. Maybe so, but I think you'll see more upsets, more closely contested ball games as well. I think this is overall a massive victory for college football. Keep it at 12, though. Doesn't need to expand anymore, and I think this first year of this experiment, it's going to be full-time, I guess you could say, moving forward. Something that's actually going to work out very well for the fans.
I think 12 is where you got to be. I don't think anything further makes any sense. I think this does help, the New Year's Six Bowl, all 6 of these bowl games, the ones you think of when you think of college football now mean something. In the previous cycle, you'd have the 2 that were the playoffs and the other 4 were kind of, a wash. Obviously, we saw the Orange Bowl last year. It could be a complete disaster. Plus, a lot of opt-outs were in the Fiesta Bowl last year. Now there'll be no opt-outs in any of the big 6 New Year's 6 bowls. So all 6 of those bowl games still mean a whole lot. I think it's better for the sport when, the Rose Bowl means something every single year. When the Peach Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, Fiesta Bowl all mean something. I certainly think the ripple effect further down college football will be, need to be studied. I don't know how much of an impact this will have on the lower tier bowls or those next, high up tier. I'm thinking of the Citrus Bowl, that kind of upper echelon, the old Outback Bowl, that upper echelon of top tier bowls that was right below the New Year's 6. What will those bowl games look like? Will there be a lot of opt-outs in that game? I think the ripple effect will have to be studied. But I think, getting more teams in the dance is not a bad deal. I'm, still a little lukewarm to the idea, but I do think having a group of 5 representative in there could be really interesting, especially if it's a team that can go out and upset a 5 seed in year 1. That would certainly make a lot of people quiet. I like what you can do with this, bringing in a bunch of different SEC teams, bringing in a bunch of Big Ten teams, giving Notre Dame a nice pathway with that easy schedule, giving them a chance to get in the dance and see what they can do. This is very interesting for the sport. I can't complain about more football. Getting an extra week on the season is not too bad either. And I'm excited to see how this all kind of shakes out.
It's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. This is, a bracket, 3+ months in the making. It certainly took a lot of careful construction, and obviously we still end up with what everyone else probably has as well, but I certainly think that, we take pride in being able to try and be accurate as possible with these. I certainly think this is a great playoff bracket we have put together. Obviously, it's not going to be 100% perfect at the end of the year, but the excitement is, on deck for a great college football season.
The offseason's a lot of long hours across the board studying all the Power 4 teams plus the Group of 5 teams to get our predictions across the board. A lot of work, but now we're almost there. This upcoming Saturday we'll have the kickoff of the season in Dublin. I'm looking forward to this college football season as a new era kind of kicks off here with the expanded playoff and conference realignment. A lot of new battles, a lot of new different foes joining conference, and a lot at stake this year. I'm excited for this college football season.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.